My brother took me out of his will. Now he wants my help to pay off his house. I am a 37-year-old man, and the first time I learned my brother had erased me from his will was the same afternoon he asked me to co-sign a refinance to save his house. The two facts arrived within minutes of each other. A PDF of his updated estate plans pinged my phone, and then a second message, casual as a calendar invite, asking if I could jump on a quick call about mortgage options. My hands went numb before my brain could finish the math. The PDF was sterile and confident. My name, which used to live in those documents under beneficiaries, was gone. In its place were Emily, his wife of 3 years, and her 2 teenage sons, written in a font that made them look inevitable. The note below the attachment said he'd streamline things, that it was simpler this way. I stared at the screen and felt the old anger, the one I'd learned to swallow for the sake of family peace, creeping up my throat like a spill you can't mop fast enough. We grew up believing we were a unit, me and Mark, 2 years apart, sharing bunk beds and winter coats, and the myth that brothers are a permanent address. Dad ran a small plumbing business out of a garage that smelled like welded metal and coffee. Mom taught piano to kids who hated practicing and parents who hated confronting it. When Dad died suddenly the year I turned 29, everything tilted. Mark stepped into the business with a chest-out energy I mistook for leadership. I cleaned the accounts, closed Dad's credit cards, wrote the emails that began, "I'm sorry to tell you. We split the ashes, but not the grief." 2 things mattered to Dad: the house he paid off a year before he died and the business he kept in one piece through 3 recessions. His will was straightforward: house to Mum for life, after her, to be shared between us, business to be owned jointly until one of us bought the other out at a fair price based on a valuation we agreed on in writing. It wasn't romantic, but it was clear. We signed. We nodded. We promised. Then Mark met Emily. I wanted to like her. She was efficient and warm in that social way where compliments are currency. She carried tote bags that said things like, "Live, laugh, love," in a font that made me want to read something complicated. The first time I saw them together, she tucked her hand into the crook of his arm like she'd always known where she fit. At dinner she told Mum she admired self-made families, and asked if we'd considered selling the house and moving Mum somewhere manageable. The room temperature dropped 10 degrees. What changed first wasn't money. It was language. Mark started calling my half of the business passive and his half operational. He told me lenders understand who carries the risk. When he renovated the shop and added a glossy showroom that made our regulars feel like they needed a suit to buy a drained snake, he called it modernizing. He also stopped asking before moving money, calling it liquidity management. I kept spreadsheets. He kept momentum. Mum shrank around the edges during this period like fabric that went through the dryer too hot. She still sat at the piano every morning, scales like bones under skin, but she stopped answering questions about the house. "It will be what it will be," she said, like resignation was a hymn. 6 months ago, Mark called to say he and Emily were buying the place across town, the forever home, big porch, mature oaks, the kind of kitchen you take photos of. I congratulated him and tried to ignore the math. He threw a housewarming with canapes I couldn't pronounce and a playlist that made the rooms feel staged. In his toast he thanked Emily for teaching me to think bigger. He didn't look at me when he said it. Now he was texting me to co-sign. The mortgage broker had raised questions about his debt-to-income ratio, about a renovation loan stacked on a helix stacked on a truck lease stacked on a new line of credit to smooth cash flow. He needed my signature, he said, because I was family, and we don't let each other drown. I opened the will PDF again and scrolled to the witness page where his signature curved like a flourish. My name belonged to a different document, apparently, the one he consulted when he needed ballast. I didn't call him back that day. Instead, I walked to Mum's because sometimes the only way to get oxygen into a thought is to move your body through it. She was in her robe, hair pinned up with a pencil, practicing Schubert. I told her about the will, the refinance, the request. She kept playing until the end of the phrase, then rested her fingers on the keys. "He sent you his will, she asked, not quite believing it herself. He called it transparency, I said. She pressed one note 3 times, soft, like a heartbeat. When your father was alive, he used to say wills bring out the pry bars in people, she murmured. You find out where the weak boards were. We drank tea at the small table that still had a burn mark from the time Mark put a hot pan down without a trivet when he was 18 and unstoppable. I told her about the numbers. She stared at the steam like it might arrange itself into answers. You won't sign, she said finally. It wasn't a question. I won't, I said, feeling both stubborn and small. The thing about families is that decisions don't stay still. They ripple through group chats and church pews and Sunday dinners until everybody has an opinion and a seat. Word got out fast. An aunt texted to say, blood is thicker than paper. A cousin wrote, don't cut off your nose to spite your face. A family friend forwarded a meme about brothers being built-in safety nets. It felt like everyone had been CC'd on a moral I hadn't agreed to. Mark did call the next day. His voice was bright, performative, how he sounds with clients. He said the will was a formality. He said I should focus on the present, not hypothetical futures. He said Emily's boys were at a delicate age and stability mattered. He said he'd always assumed my share was a courtesy anyway, because I didn't really want the business. He said words like optics and efficiency. He said, this is the part that replayed in my head at night, that I had benefited from his generosity for years. He meant the time he helped me with a bridge loan when my car died and the winter he covered Mum's oil bill when I was between contracts. He didn't mention the months I ran the books for free to keep his suppliers from walking, or the nights I slept in the shop office during the flood so the pumps didn't fail. Help is tallied differently by the person who owns the pen. Instead of arguing, I made a timeline. It's a thing my therapist taught me: when someone is trying to rearrange your memory, put the days in order. I wrote the dates we incorporated the business after Dad's death and the day we agreed to buy me out in year 5 so I could start my own consultancy. I wrote the day Mark met Emily, the day the showroom opened, the day he texted me a photo of a diamond he couldn't afford, the day he suggested Mum downsize to something with rails on the stairs, the day I said no, the day I found out he'd helped her call a realtor anyway. I wrote the debts. I wrote the toasts. I wrote the will. There is a particular humiliation to being argued into gratitude while someone is taking something from you. He called me twice more that week, and I let the phone ring because I didn't trust my voice not to hand him tools. Emily texted me a paragraph about supporting growth and choosing grace and how the boys see you as a safe male figure, which read like a performance for an audience that wasn't me. She added a line about not clinging to old structures out of fear, and I laughed out loud in my kitchen with the kind of humor that shows up right before tears. On Sunday, I drove past their forever home because I hated the way my imagination kept inventing it. The porch was flanked by planters so symmetrical they looked measured with a laser. Through the window I could see a wall of built-ins already filled with objects that had no fingerprints: glossy coffee table books, a ceramic horse that suggested wealth the way a new coat suggests warmth. I pictured the refinery of their dinners, the practiced ease of their kids who hadn't yet figured out what debt feels like when it sits in your chest. When I got home, there was an envelope in my mailbox with the broker's packet, refinance options, highlighted in yellow, a sticky note with my name on it, a cheerful brochure about generational wealth stapled to a form that would put my credit at risk for a man who'd put my name in a document only when it suited him. My own handwriting, no, not yet, appeared in my head like a signature I didn't want to learn. The family group chat lit that night after dinner at Mum's. I skipped it, Mark didn't. According to my aunt, he stood in her kitchen making small talk until the right audience had gathered, then he explained loudly that I was refusing to help the family. He never mentioned the will. He did mention my freelance lifestyle, as if irregular checks meant I was morally unserious. He apparently said the house was an investment for all of us, which was ironic given the paperwork. Michael, that's my cousin, not my son, sent me a private message. He's campaigning. I replied, I noticed. Michael, you okay? Me, not really. He said he had my back. Sometimes one person writing, "I see it," is the only sandbag against a flood. The next morning, I found Mum on the front steps with the mail. Her eyes were puffy. She handed me a letter. Mark had suggested, no, arranged, for a reverse mortgage consultation for her, just to explore options. I felt that motion inside me of something delicate being stepped on by something confident. Mum had not asked for this. The letter had a date. The date was that afternoon. I called Mark then, not because I thought talking would change his mind, but because I was done pretending that polite silence is a kind of wisdom. He answered like we were in the middle of a conversation and I just stepped out to fetch something. He said the reverse mortgage was a tool. He said I was being emotional, which in our family is the nuclear option. You say that when you want the listener to question their own temperature. I told him to cancel the appointment. He said he couldn't, they're on their way. I hung up and canceled it myself. The woman on the phone said she completely understood the pressure some families put on their elders. Her voice made me want to cry and cook for her in equal measure. That night I wrote Mark an email because pages are calmer than voices, and calm was the only currency I had. I said I would not co-sign. I said I would not allow him to pressure Mum. I said if he continued to interfere with her housing or try to move her papers to his advantage, we would involve a lawyer. I said the will was his to write, but I would not pretend his choices were a misunderstanding when he wanted credit for being decisive. He replied with a single sentence, "I expected more from you." It landed like a brick wrapped in gift paper. For a week I slept badly. In the mornings my chest hurt the way it does when you've carried something heavy for too long and finally put it down and your body resents you for the change. I kept the timeline on the table and added a column labeled, "What They Say," and another labeled, "What Happened." Under, "What They Say," I wrote, "Family helps family." Under, "What Happened," I wrote, "Family helps when help isn't an eraser." Then, as if the universe wanted to see if I'd flinch, Mark texted a photo of a foreclosure notice. Not on his house, on a rental property he'd bought with a balloon payment no one with a mortgage should have said yes to. He said he needed a short bridge, that the bank would work with him if a lump sum landed by Friday. He called me his last call. He wrote, "Don't do this," as if I were the one hurting him. I closed my eyes and listened to Mum in the next room practicing the same 4 bars of Schubert until the notes grew roots. I thought about Dad's hands, the cuticles torn from years of wrenching stuck valves, the way he used to say, "Fix the leak before you fix the paint." I thought about the way Mark used words like paint. I thought about debt piled on debt and the difference between drowning and refusing to hand someone a cinder block. I didn't answer his text. I wrote another one of my own on a sticky note and stuck it to the timeline, saying no is not an act of war. That's where part 1 ends, with a man holding a stack of papers, a piano line circling the same 4 measures, a brother who streamlined his will like it was a spreadsheet and then tried to put his hands in my pockets. I can tell you already that the rest of the story isn't cleaner. It rarely is when the pry bars come out. I am a 37-year-old man, and the day I stopped arguing with Mark's story and started building my own, I opened a folder and labeled it, "Receipts." Not to publish. To protect the parts of the past that were being edited for me. The first file was the valuation we'd gotten for Dad's business after he died, 5 pages, sober font, numbers that didn't know how to lie. The second was the buyout agreement Mark had signed then tabled, promising to purchase my share in year 5. Year 5 had come and gone like weather. The third was a copy of Mum's life estate deed, the one that said clearly the house was hers until death, and after, split between me and Mark. The fourth was the letter about the reverse mortgage I'd cancelled, with the date and time circled like a bruise. The fifth was the will he'd sent, the one where he'd invited me to witness my own removal. I stacked them in order and felt the thin relief of paper. I also made a list of who mattered for what came next. Not the cousins who like to comment on family posts. Not the aunt who thinks prayer solves balance sheets. The people with levers. Our old family lawyer, who still uses binder clips like art. Mum's doctor, who could write the letter that said, "Undue stress," in a way the court would respect. The banker who handled Dad's account for 20 years and once drove to the shop after hours so we could meet payroll when a check posted late. A neighbor who'd watched 2 decades of our driveway and could testify, if it came to it, to who showed up and who showed off. I wasn't aiming for Court. But I wanted Court to know I wasn't afraid to say the word. Mark, meanwhile, turned up the volume. He posted a photo of his forever home with a caption about choosing generosity over resentment. He told relatives I was withholding support to punish him for being successful. He stopped answering my emails and started CCing people who didn't belong on threads, a tactic he's used since primary school to make truth feel like a vote. He texted Mum at midnight messages that read like kindness on the surface and pressure underneath. Just checking you're warm enough. Have you considered the stairs? Wouldn't it be easier to be closer to us? Mum and I sat with her teacups and decided on a rule: he could visit when it suited her, he could not bring papers. If he did, she'd end the visit. If he tried to bring anyone helpful, she'd call me. She practiced the sentence, "not today," like she practiced scales. It sounded small. It wasn't. Then Emily called me. Her voice was smooth, a sales pitch wrapped in silk. She said she was worried about Mark's health. She said stress looked bad on him. She said their boys were watching and learning how family behaves. She said if I helped this once, we could reset. She said God loves a cheerful giver, which was a line I'd heard in church only from people with their hands out. I told her I was not a lender of last resort. I told her she should talk to the bank. I told her to stop putting her mouth where my mother lives. If this sounds like anger wearing a suit, it was. But suits are for court, and anger rarely helps there. A week later, a lawyer's letter arrived addressed to Mum. It was couched in polite phrases, but the center was a demand. Mark requested an accounting of house-related expenditures, with an eye toward restructuring obligations. I took the letter to our family lawyer. She took off her glasses and rubbed the bridge of her nose in a way that made me think of my childhood and overdue bills. We can respond, she said, with a reminder that your mother owes him nothing. In fact, if he keeps pushing, we'll remind him that any interference with a life estate can be considered harassment. Additionally, we can raise the business buyout he's ignored. If he wants to introduce obligations, we have a few. She drafted a response that made my spine feel like it had been ironed. It cited sections, referenced exhibits, used words like derivative claim and fiduciary duty in a way that said, "You began this conversation assuming leverage, allow me to introduce gravity." We sent it certified and waited through the kind of quiet that means someone is looking for a new playbook. Here is where the house entered the story again, not the forever one, the one with the piano and the burn mark. Mum slipped on the back step and bruised her hip. It wasn't catastrophic, but it was the kind of accident that gives opportunists vocabulary. Mark arrived with a contractor 24 hours later and a tape measure. I intercepted them on the path. The contractor looked at the ground when I told him we had our own people. Mark tried to step past me. I moved my body the way a son does when a line needs drawing. Mum, from the door, called out the sentence she'd practiced, "Not today." It rang out like a bell. They left. My hands shook after in a way adrenaline makes a body honest. That night, Mum cried for the first time in months. Not because she was hurt, because she was tired of being a field where men rehearsed. I sat with her until the crying turned into breath and the breath turned into sleep. In the morning, she asked me to take her to the bank. At the bank, we met with the man who'd watched Dad bring in deposits with hands still smelling of solder. He listened, he nodded, he pulled up the accounts that had weathered 20 winters. He made 2 suggestions. First, move Mum's current account to one with alerts so any unusual activity pinged my phone. Second, add a note on her profile that no changes could be made without both our signatures. He said he couldn't keep Mark out of the lobby, but he could keep him out of the system. I wanted to stand and applaud in the middle of the quiet bank and thank the planet for competent men. Mark's next move was, in his mind, compassionate. He wrote the family an email about navigating hard choices and seeking unity and attached a draft family agreement where Mum would agree to sell the house to him at a fair family rate and rent the guest room back for continuity. It was, on its face, a plan. In practice, it was an eviction disguised as care. I scanned the PDF and circled the clause that let him flip the house in a year. Mum read it and said, "They never like to say the quiet part out loud." I sent back a 2-line reply, "No. Please direct all future proposals through counsel." It felt like saying stop to a dog that has never heard the word and isn't sure if you have treats. Meanwhile, Mark's mortgage machine ground on. He got the refinance without me, at a rate that would make anyone sweat, tied to conditions that looked like fireworks. Emily posted a photo of their new kitchen stools with a caption about resilience, and I stared at the screen and wished I could care less about staging. The only thing that comforted me was the timeline. Paper doesn't pretend. Numbers add up. Balloons eventually come due. Then the rumor started, that I had cut myself out of Mark's will by refusing to be part of the family. It traveled from Emily's sister to a cousin to a church lady who likes hot tea. At a baptism brunch, a man I barely knew put a hand on my shoulder and said, "Some of us aren't built to share." I pictured the will's clean lines, my absent name, and said nothing because there are fights you don't have in rooms with cake. Another week. Another envelope. This one from Mark's business account, offering to accelerate my buyout for Dad's company at a number that would have been fair 2 years ago before the showroom and the expansion and the debt, but now felt like being paid in store credit at a shop that might close. It included a confidentiality clause that read like a muzzle. Our lawyer penciled in a counteroffer, pay the proper value using an independent valuation, staged over time with interest, secured by a lien on his rental. If he balked, we'd file. He balked. We filed. If you've never filed anything against family, let me tell you what it feels like, amazing and awful. Like changing a tire in the rain while a choir sings your name and boos at the same time. Court didn't happen, not fully. The filing triggered a mediation. The mediator was a woman with a voice like a good metronome and an expression that said she'd seen every flavor of sibling war. She separated us into rooms and walked between, translator of pride into terms. Mark's opening gambit was familiar, I was ungrateful, he was practical, Emily's boys shouldn't be punished because I couldn't move on. I asked the mediator to bring the conversation back to facts, the buyout agreement, the will, the reverse mortgage attempt, the refinance ask, the letters, the timeline. I slid the papers across the table like cards. She read. She nodded. She left. When she returned, she carried a breath that seemed steadier. Here is what we agreed to, not because love grew, but because leverage did. Mark would complete the buyout over 5 years at the current market value, a lien would attach to the rental until he finished paying, any changes to Mum's housing would require her lawyer's sign-off, and he would send our lawyer a letter retracting the request for household restructuring. The will. His to write. The mortgage. His to carry. The cosign. Off the table for good. He did not look at me when he signed. Emily wasn't there. When he left, the door clicked with the finality of a tool being put away after a long, loud day. The aftermath was quieter than I expected. No fireworks. No dramatic apology. Mum bought a proper rail for the back steps from a carpenter who refused to take full price because your husband fixed my pipes in '03 when I was broke. I stopped checking Emily's feed. The shop kept making money because pipes keep breaking no matter how much family law you read. In the evenings I sat at Mum's table with the burn mark and did crosswords while she played and the house felt like itself. People still try to hand me the old lines. Family is everything. It's only money. You'll regret court. I don't try to convince them. I've learned that some conversations are just auditions for approval. I've started to prefer silence to judgments disguised as advice. Mark hasn't asked for help again. He sends Mum flowers on Sundays with cards that say things like, thinking of you, and leave out the sentence that would matter, I'm sorry. He invited me to a barbecue last month to reset. I said maybe and didn't go. It isn't spite. It's a boundary, and boundaries sound like rudeness to people who benefit from their absence. Sometimes I think about the version of this story where I signed the refinance and we avoided this ugliness and the house swallowed one more debt and the will stayed the way he wanted and I kept the peace by mortgaging the part of myself that knows the difference between help and harm. I imagine the quiet of that road, the approval bought with a signature, the applause from people who love order more than fairness. Then I imagine the morning after, when the weight settles and the ledger shows, again, that the person who cares most about my future has to be me. A friend asked recently, "Do you ever worry you'll regret not fixing it?" I said I didn't fix it. That's the point. Fixing it would have meant reattaching my name to Mark's debts and calling it love. What I did was refuse. Not because I wanted him to drown. Because I wanted to watch my mother sit at her piano in a house that still belonged to her without wondering whose name would be on the deed after she was gone. Last night, I found Dad's old wrench in a box under Mum's staircase. It still smelled faintly of metal and mornings. The handle is worn smooth where his hand held it thousands of times. Tools like that teach you something if you pay attention. The first turn is the hardest. After that, pressure and angle do the rest. You don't twist to punish the pipe. You twist because the leak won't stop by being wished away. My brother took me out of his will and then asked me to help pay for his house. I said no. I hope one day he understands that it was the first honest gift I've given him in years, the chance to carry the things he chose to pick up, and the proof that I am done pretending my pockets are a family plan. If he ever wants to talk like men who remember sharing bunk beds and winter coats and a father who believed in fixing leaks before paint, I will make tea. I will sit at the table with the burn mark and listen. Until then, the piano sounds the same as it always did, and that is enough music for now.
Follow me for more stories.